Welcome back to the State of Affairs special podcast on this Saturday. I have got with me Dr. Pooja Bhatt. She is a research scholar and also have been working with different institutes when it comes to maritime security. She has worked at CAPS and also is, working with ICWA, Indian Council of World Affairs. Apart from that, she has had her PhD in diplomacy and disarmament from JNU. Her basic research area is maritime security, but we will be talking about her book, Nine Dash Line, Deconstructing the South China Sea Conundrum. It's for all the viewers, let's put it this way: the entire Indo-Pacific discourse stems out of the South China Sea dispute, if we can largely look at it. Given the way how things have just played out between US on the one side and China on the other side, this book has been published after the pandemic stuck, and after especially the milestone, I guess, that prompted the author to write this book was because of the 2016 verdict by the United Nations arbitration council's decision on Philippines that gave it that actually gave the verdict in its favor. So I would like to welcome Dr. Pooja on this podcast first.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Mehraj, for having me for this podcast. It's really an honor and a prestige to be here. Thank you.
So, Dr. Pooja, tell us briefly what actually made this happen for you to write a book as important as this, as relevant as this, and as interesting as this.
Yeah. Thank you. That's actually a very good question to start with. This book started sometime in November 2016, and it was just a few months after we had the Permanent Court of Arbitration that they came out with its verdict in July 12th, 2016. And this was a time when we were just hearing sporadic news about China Sea, how it is going, the small events every now and then it's going. However, it's in the matter of coming months post July verdict, we saw South China Sea coming more frequently in newspapers. Before that, it was a sporadic, and now we have seen weekly affair. Sometimes it was like 2 or 3 news every week. So that the frequency of news increased, the global attention increased during that time. And I was with Center for APA Studies that time, and we were thinking on the maritime domain at that time, because we were trying to understand beyond Indian territory and what are the issues at the global level that can impact Indian security. This issue actually caught our attention, that how South China Sea is becoming a global hotspot for strategic events, though not everyone was paying attention at it right that time, because it's not Indian Ocean immediate. So India should not be very much worried about South China Sea. However, between me and the DG that time, Air Marshal Vinod Patni, who had immense vision, in terms of strategic affairs, we just thought there is something about this event which might eventually affect India and Indian Ocean security, and we started following that, and that's when the book started. So entire book is all about the South China Sea and Nine Dash Line, which forms the heart of the dispute, and the book tries to uncover not only the strategic aspect of it, not only the military aspect of South China Sea, how Chinese vessels were growing, US vessels were growing, their contestation between them, but also seeing the same issue from historical perspective, how this came about, from environmental perspective, how it is affecting the global flora and fauna in the South China Sea. It also covers the economic relations, which are now after the 2020 trade war, we have seen how that also became a reality in South China Sea. It also saw the relations between the states, the ASEAN states, US and China, and how that has a different dynamic because of the South China Sea. So we broke down the South China Sea concept into multiple areas where cooperation and contestations can be seen in the coming years. And I'm quite happy to say that a lot of those issues are what we are dealing 5 years down the line. So, yeah.
Before we can just get into this entire discussion, the first thing I would like you to delve upon is that this decision that came into back in 2016, most of the people don't know about this 9 dash line thing, and before it was 11 dash line historically, if we say. It
Hmm.
was only after China had some of understanding with the other country, and it was limited to this 9 dash line.
Hmm.
So, what actually you think as an author and as a researcher into the maritime security domain? Why does this all come up with? I mean, what made it start? Was it China's? Because the book basically pertains to actually understanding the way China behaves, the behavior of the China. It can define its involvement in the South China Sea and its interests that are there. But basically, we need to understand what this 9 dash line constitutes, because most of the viewers might not be knowing about that.
All right, that's a very good start, actually. So I'll first of all take it to take the entire issue only to 1990s, because since then we have seen Chinese, fishermen, Chinese military harassing Filipino fishermen, Vietnamese fishermen in the region, the South China Sea. They were having this kind of, contestation within themselves. The Chinese military used to shoo them out of their fishing grounds. They used to establish themselves in some of the small islands in the Spratlys and the Parasil group of islands, and they used to shoo other navies from those regions and all. Those were sporadic events. Everyone was aware. At least US was very much aware. Those subsequent administration from the US government were very much aware of Chinese activities. However, they just did not find a lot of traction for South China Sea issues. They were more busy with the Middle East, Afghanistan. They were busy with even this Asia Pacific, which a concept which different administration got, but none of them were going to South China Sea basically. However, what triggered the point was sometime in 2009, 10, 11, that when Filipino fishermen basically started getting really more harassed by the Chinese fishermen. Same was with sorry, I meant Chinese military. Same with the Vietnamese fishermen. They were very harassed by the Chinese military. Uh, in a very unexpected move, Philippines went to the Permanent Court of Arbitration in 2013. Because under UNCLOS, if two parties have disputes, you have several mechanisms to resolve those issues. In case of when both the parties do not agree to the same dispute, so one party has this under one of the clauses, UNCLOS clauses has this provision that one party can approach UNCLOS, and UNCLOS will provide a permanent court of arbitration for that particular case. And that's exactly what happened with Philippines China case also. China definitely refused to be a part of it, but UNCLOS established its relevance that because one of the parties is aggrieved by these issues, and they have lodged a complaint for on our board, so we will be taking our matter forward. That case went on till 2016. On July 12th, 2016, the Permanent Court of Arbitration came out with a ruling saying that Filipino fishermen were actually being harassed by Chinese military, and how Chinese military has been causing issues of flora and fauna and environmental issues, and most importantly, what it said was China does not have any historic claims on this issue of South China Sea islands. So what was the basic argument China was making? That since so they produced China during the entire procedure sometime in 2014-15, they came out with this map, and they just sent it as a note verbal, which is a diplomatic note at the UN, where it shows the map that this is our map, which shows 9 dashes, and because this is a historic map, we have historical claims in it. So the matter went ahead, and PCA and other countries asked that what is the relevance of this map. When was the first time this map came into existence? They came up with another map, and they said it was sometime in 1940s when Kuomintang government was ruling China. They had this map which showed 13 maps, 13 dashes on the 11 dashes on the map, And both the maps are provided in my book. These are two maps which are provided in my book, and they said this is the origin of the map. So since 1940s we have this. This fact might have certain relevance because in 1950s China did negotiate with Vietnam, which was one of the parties within the South China Sea, and removed two of the dashes from that side, and now 11 dashes turned into the 9 dashes. So they had some kind of agreement between China and Vietnam where 2 dashes were removed. The 11 dashes since 1950 became 9 dashes, and since then 9 dashes continue. So this is the kind of historic background which China kept on providing. Here, one of the mistakes we would be saying would be from Vietnamese part, because they accepted these dashes way back in 1950s and gave that kind of relevance to Chinese 9 dashes since then. And this went on till 2016, and that 9 dashes remained relevant for China since then. And they kept on claiming the entire waters and entire landmarks, landforms, I will say, because they are actually not islands as per UNCLOS provisions. So they kept on claiming on that. What happened significantly after 2016 verdict was that no more China was calling as their own jurisdiction. Started revising their statements by saying certain parts of Chinese claims in the South China Sea and the relevant waters there within. So the relevant waters and islands came into existence in terms of entire South China Sea or entire 9 dash line claim. So this was a significant shift after the 2016.
So the basic thing is that it's because China has been producing a different map and claiming historically that nine dash line area belongs to it. And also there is something called UN clause that's at work. I mean, is it contradictory what China has been saying and claiming? That's why, because we have seen the decision that came in favor of Philippines was that United Nations Arbitration Council, it actually contradicted what China was claiming, and the verdict was given in favor of Philippines. So, what did UN clause mention about it? I mean, on the about the law of sea.
Uh, uh, so UNCLOS basically, when it was being formed since 1960s, 70s, incidentally, China was also a party of the formation of UNCLOS as a document, as a when it was being made as a treaty. Uh, you would be very amazed to know that when the entire clauses were being formulated, because how it goes is in international organization, the treaties are formulated, every countries give their comments meanwhile, so they are aware of what is going on. China did not ratify or say gave any comments till 1982, and even after signing it did not ratify. And meanwhile, it was making its domestic laws, which were directly contradicting the UNCLOS. So, and it later on, when it sometime in early 90s, when China actually ratified the UNCLOS, it had already domestic laws preceding the UNCLOS. So now, every time we go to international court saying, UNCLOS should be applicable, China would come and say, we have a domestic law which is preceding the UNCLOS, and we will respect our domestic laws. So that is a kind of international mind game being played at the international organization, and this is one of the initial examples I would give, that how China has been party wanting to be a party of international organization, international treaties, however strengthening its own vision, strengthening its own position first before ratifying it. And I would say that in future we will see more and more events happening in terms of international organization where China is a party, where China will try and revise international organization. However, it will strengthen its own position so that tomorrow, if some clause comes back to bite it back, it will have its position upper than the international clause.
So the basic thing will be, when it comes to your book, is that China is being belligerent. China is being expansionist because it has a grand strategy to actually become a superpower by 2050,
Mm.
roughly.
Yes.
And whatever happens, whatever be the UN conventions, whatever be the global institutions that put limitations on any countries, belligerence and the country that actually violates the sovereignty of the other countries. There is something that you have been mentioning in the book, is that China has been backing its claims historically through the environmental, prospects that it has got, and legal perspective also, and trade and commerce also. But there is something we can say: the 40 or 45% of the global trade happens through the sea lanes passing through South China Sea, and there is a consensus amongst the countries that actually have been partnering with the Indo-Pacific under the Indo-Pacific umbrella. So why do you see that thing happening? Because China is not stopping. There is an Indo-Pacific framework at work, at actually in action. So what do you make out of that? Is China just moving ahead? It's not. I'm just putting my argument on your book, and just what I just want you to delve upon this to tell us more. That has China stopped, or we are just watching China going ahead with its grand strategy of violating no matter what comes its way?
Yeah. So before this, we need to understand a global reality, which is that China has grown militarily and economically nearly as powerful as US. So it is the second pole to the US. Having a country that powerful, you will always now see China. You cannot ignore China in international context. Uh, so there are only two choices left with US and the Western world and the like-minded countries, and I would say India also in that case, that either you completely ignore China, which is not possible, right? You form your international organizations and memberships and everything where you completely exclude China, which is not possible because we are interlinked so much economically and otherwise with China that that is not possible. Second thing is you make it a part of international organization, which is what subsequent US administration also tried, including Barack Obama's administration and all. They try to inculcate China into liberal hemisphere so that China will try and behave as other liberal countries. However, China turned out smarter. They became, since 1999 90s, they became a party to a lot of international organizations, and they tried to also revise it. So they are not just becoming a meek party to the organization. What they're trying to do is, because of their internal strength, because of the military and economic strength, they're also trying to revise those organizations in terms of their norms, in terms of their structures, in terms of their memberships. You remember the Paris Agreement, where China tried to push around its weight so much that Trump administration was, they decided to finally pull it off, because they, and also there was a fault at Trump administration at the domestic level also. But we saw several other institutions like this where China tried to put their weight across in terms of this. And we saw other so if you remember, in ASEAN also, in several in ARF and other several other organizations, where China actually did not want India to be a party of it. So that is a kind of weightage now China keeps, uh, that we cannot ignore it. But even if we are with China, within those organizations, within those systems, we will be seeing constant push and shove, with China, that it will try to throw its weight around. And it is in this context we need to read how Asian security architecture, which is another of my research area, is to see how we will see that kind of push and shove, that India is just as SCO. If you remember 2017 SCO, India came to be a party because of Russia, because China, after the argument that when China said it will say yes for India's membership to SCO only when Russia would agree to Pakistan's entry to SCO. So in that condition, we both India and Pakistan became SCO members in 2017. And now India is trying to put this weight through, and now India is becoming chairing SCO next year. So these are the organizations and the push and shove we will be seeing, but we cannot ignore China, of course.
You have mentioned a very interesting thing. That's the security of the entire South China Sea region and the littoral states. What about their security? Is their security system so fragile that China just comes and no matter what, it just will expand at the peril of their security. Where is that state of security with the littoral states that are there? Where do you see the scenario just going? What about the security paradigm? Because that's so basic to the nation state system.
So when I say security, I do not say it from a very hardcore security perspective. It's not just the military perspective. I would also broaden it and specify the economic security, the health security, the human security, which are the crucial elements of security now. So when we talk about Indo-Pacific security, and we have seen recently because of pandemic that how a pandemic actually shook the foundations of security because of in terms of health security, in terms of economic security, in terms of human security, and having a hard concept of security aside, we were uh, more fragile than ever. A war wouldn't have made us that fragile as much as a pandemic made us fragile. And what happened in that sense, that countries had to come up together to resolve these issues. That was one good side, that where countries would not come together to act in the issues. Another issue is the HADR related issues, when we have increasing number of cyclones in Indo-Pacific. And incidentally, Indo-Pacific is a region which has the highest number of cyclones each year, and that provides this that because we are economically fragile region as it is, our populations are dependent on oceans for the economy, food security, and every kind of other kind of security. Countries are now coming together to form transnational collaborations and partnerships. So I think if we talk about security, we should not be just saying China as a threat to security, but these other issues where which are issues of security as well,
So,
that should be also included.
largely, the book actually addresses the basic concern that how China behaves and why does it behave that way. Is there any mention of the question of Taiwan, because that's also an important part of this entire South China Sea discourse?
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
have you mentioned it somewhere? Because recently, Nancy Pelosi's visit to the Taiwan has created furore in the Chinese media and also at the global level. So, where do you see that?
Yes, during that time, Taiwan was not a hotspot. So, book hasn't mentioned as Taiwan as hotspot for a Indo-Pacific challenge. But on the reference of how in 1950, since 1950s, Taiwan Strait has remained an issue of contestation between China and the US. That has been taken into historic account of within the book. Uh, Now there are scenarios again, and I've written a recent paper on at how Taiwan Strait and the issues of South China Sea will affect the security of Indo-Pacific, and there are different scenarios. This paper would be coming out recently, and I've worked out how certain issues within South China Sea might reflect on Indian Ocean region, while certain other aspects, which other analysts say that every issue in South China Sea will reflect on Indian Ocean security. I would disagree with that.
The important part of this conversation will always be that what are India's stakes in this entire thing? Where do you see India as an important? There is no doubt that India is one of the key actors and one of the key states when it comes to the Indo-Pacific discourse. But given the way we have in Indian Ocean region, we have Indo-Pacific paradigm. Also, what are Indian stakes in this entire South China Sea? Because you might have actually, tracked all these developments and all the interests that India has there in the South China Sea when it comes to global free trade system, when it comes to India's interests in the Indo-Pacific.
Yeah, that's excellent question. Each of the chapter of the book, whether historic, legal, environmental, economic, ecological, whatever, they strategic, they have actually seen from the lens of India. It's not a US vantage point from where I have written this book. I have seen how each of these issues will affect India's own position. So India also has its interest within South China Sea in terms of trade, in terms of we have our oil blocks there, how it will be impacted. India keeps, conducting, has its warships going through Indian Ocean, South China Sea through Indian Ocean, because we have our trade interests there, and we have been conducting our trade since ages with the countries in Northeast Asia, and we have our comprehensive economic partnership with several of one of them. So when your trade is strong, you need to keep your sea line of communications also clear and free of any kind of threat. So logically, our Indian warships would be there, and every time our Indian warship is in near the South China Sea, we have Chinese sending up some demarche. So I think that is another aspect of security, how we want to secure. Then ecological concept is another thing, which which is coming up in the fore, that how the South China Sea is now devoid of fish. And we are seeing that how fishermen from Chinese militia are coming to farther waters. We have seen recently as close as Indian easy in August last year, when we had Chinese fishermen fishing in Indian waters. Another issue is of research vessels, because in research vessel and both the ways. Okay, now Indian Ocean, China has sorted Indian South China Sea background. They know the entire topography of South China Sea. Now if they want their access to Indian Ocean and beyond, they need to know the topography, the salinity, the oceanic atmosphere of Indian Ocean, so that their ships and their submarines can pass. So we'll be seeing more and more research vessels coming there for doing that kind of research. Also, we have a lot of polymetallic nodules available in the, and some similar high value minerals present in the Indian Ocean. So China, you would see more and more research vessels coming. What can India do about it? So these are several areas where Indian Ocean and India would be concerned in the coming years, and we need to keep a focus on each of these areas in terms of legal, strategic, economic, trade, our own security of the Indian Ocean flora and fauna. These are huge range of issues India needs to start worrying about, that we will see Chinese presence in Indian Ocean, and how we are going to manage about it.
The one important thing, and the last thing I'd say is that before we sign off, because we have just 3 to 4 minutes left, is that when we mentioned about that there is an interesting thing that you have written this book from the Indian vantage point of view, and we can safely assume that now there must be a mention of India's look east policy and act east policy. So that's because that has come from an economic outlook. It has become more a strategic outlook for India. So is there any mention of that policy and India's vision for the look east?
Absolutely. India's Act East policy is also a part of the book, because during that time we were only formulating that Act East policy. If you remember, 2014 was the time when we actually revising Look East to Act East. So how I've tried to see is that now when India is trying to improve its relation with the Southeast Asian countries, they are also trying to be a market to those countries, which was traditionally a Chinese area, right? And each of these countries, including Vietnam, Indonesia, Philippines, they are also trying to diversify their markets beyond their reliance on China. So now India is not only a strategic competitor for China, but it is also economic competitor to China. So in that regards, we need to understand that how India ASEAN, India China relations are going to see more of dynamic shifts.